Good morning. Can you guys hear me okay? Good morning. So someone asked me this week if I had any interesting and scandalous stories about Pastor Yuan. And I was going to tell a few, but then I thought, who's going to read my book when I publish it on Amazon? So I need you guys to give 5-star reviews. So be on the lookout for it. I'll put it in the bulletin. I'm really excited to be here. Yuan and I have been able to get to know each other over the last couple of years and done some wonderful work together in confirmation for students in the Valley. And we have really bonded. And I'm just excited to be able to come and to have the privilege of speaking to you guys today. And I wanted to just kind of talk about some experiences that I've gone through. I feel like sometimes the best way to communicate with folk is to tell stories about experiences you've had and how your life has grown and developed and how my faith journey has come to the place that it is now. And I think that the subject for today is who is my neighbor is an apropos one, considering what we see going on in the world fairly regularly. Am I right? You know, we have to start redefining what it means to be a neighbor. Because when I was a kid, neighbor meant whoever lived next door or in your neighborhood. And I grew up in a small neighborhood in St. Louis, Missouri. Anybody heard of St. Louis, Missouri? Sure. Yeah. One of you? Great. It's still there. And we were a small immigrant family that when my parents and I moved to the United States. I was born in India, and we moved to the United States in the mid to late 70s. And it was definitely a difficult transition, especially for my dad, who had been a high-ranking person at a company in the place that I was born, and coming to the United States. My mom was a nurse, and so she had been recruited to come to the States during a nursing shortage that was going on here. And so my dad had to drive a truck for a while and had to work filling vending machines, and eventually he put himself through a bachelor's degree and then a master's degree in engineering, and then stereotypically, as most Indians are engineers, became an engineer. And then that pressure was on from me from like the 3rd grade on, but we won't talk about that today. I'll save that for my therapist. But anyway, and I just remember the neighborhood I grew up in was small. All the houses were right next to each other. It was small brick houses, and I remember that I knew everyone on my street. And if there was ever a need that arose in the family for one reason or another, you knew you could count on your neighbors. You knew you could go across the street if you needed a cup of sugar. You knew if there was some accident that had happened in the neighborhood with any of the kids, that there would be probably a dozen moms that would come out to see what's wrong and to help. They were also very good at telling your parents when you did something wrong. So there were a lot of eyes watching. But I just remember that there was a sense of community and safety. And it didn't matter what ethnic background you came from or any of the things that we see kind of dividing the country now, and has been a thing that we've experienced in a lot of different ways for a lot of different years. I didn't feel that as a kid, and I was very lucky to not. But then as we kind of grew as a family, and my sister was born, and we needed to kind of look for a different environment to be in, and my dad was doing a little better at work, we decided to make the inevitable journey to the burbs. And so we decided, as a family, when I was heading into junior high school, we moved from the city out to the county. And this was kind of a shock to the system for me. I had been going to school in the same building for 5 years with the same group of friends. The people knew me and I knew them. I felt a sense of security there. I knew that if I had a need, they would help take care of it. But now I transferred to a place where, needless to say, I was one of the only people of my particular hue in that school system, and I felt that right away. I thought, well, there are not a lot of people that look like me here. And I felt kind of that pressure when I started going to school, and you had to change classes every period, and you only went to one school for a couple of years, and then you'd go from the junior high to the high school and so on and so forth. There's a lot of chaos. And growing up in the city, the neighborhoods were small. You rode your bike everywhere. You were, I don't know if some of you young folk understand that, like, our way of living was you get up in the morning, you get on your bike, and then you stayed out until the street lights came on, and that's when you came home. If our parents knew what we were doing in the middle of that, I'm sure some people would have some problems with it, but they didn't. And they just trusted us. Should they have? I don't know. But that was how life was. But in this new setting, things changed. And all of a sudden, it was unfamiliar territory. I didn't know how to navigate everything. And, riding your bike just meant you could ride it in your neighborhood, but if you got outside, we're talking, we were adjacent to highways and dangerous environments and places where you could get lost, and unincorporated areas where there wasn't a lot of people keeping an eye on you. So it really affected things, and it started to change. But slowly over time, you start to develop a familiarity, then you start to find connections with people, and that village atmosphere started to come back. And I realized that the way you were able to foster that is, first of all, you had to be vulnerable. You had to have an opportunity to kind of let down your guard, find connection with other people. And then you started developing those relationships. And then in those times of need, people would step up. But this isn't always the case for people. This isn't always the experience. So I thought I would bring a couple of friends to kind of illustrate how sometimes the unlikeliest of friendships could yield some of the greatest relationships that you can have. So if you wouldn't mind playing that first clip, we can see how sometimes friendships don't always start the way you would intend them to.
Order now. You get the camera, you get the printer, 4x optical zoom, Schneider lens, photo printer, SD card.
Good afternoon. My name is Russell, and I am a wilderness explorer in Tribe 54, Sweat Lodge 12. Are you in need of any assistance today, sir?
No.
I could help you cross the street.
No.
I could help you cross your yard.
No.
I could help you cross your porch.
No.
Well, I gotta help you cross something.
No, I'm doing fine.
Good friendships can often start out in a place of reluctance.
That's how we start.
Right, exactly. Because of past hurts. Now, Carl had, how many of you guys have seen the movie Up, right? It's heartbreaking at the very beginning, right? I don't want to get into it, I'll start crying here. But anyway, Carl had obviously had a life full of rich experiences, but some very, very hurtful experiences. And oftentimes when we go through experiences like that, developing the ability to let that guard down so you can create relationships is difficult. And we see that Russell is just a happy-go-lucky kid who happens to be in the Scouts that really pushed this badge thing, by the way. I'm not going to even get into that. But he said, well, I need to come and I need to help you do something. And then, based on the fact that he's a senior citizen, he thought, well, you're never going to be able to cross anything, your living room or the street, without someone helping. Can I do that for you? I need to earn this badge. And Carl's reluctance was, hey, why is this odd kid at my door, forcing me to cross my living room? And he started operating from this perspective of like, okay, I don't have time for this. And maybe part of that was that he had trusted in the past. Maybe we had gone through experiences in the past that had emblazoned on us a sense of like, I need to keep my distance. I don't want to get hurt again. I don't want to go through an experience where I have to start loving someone or start caring for someone and then get hurt by that person. Maybe they leave, maybe we get into a fight or something worse. But that is a part of being a neighbor. Recognizing that the only way you can have connection with someone is to let them in and maybe help be a part of the hurt and be a part of the healing. So we have another clip, and I'll talk about that after we see it.
Ah! Ah!
Hi, Mr. Fredrickson. Please let me in.
No.
Does it really work? Oh, this makes it go right, and that one's left. Hey, look, Bill. This baby will never be lost. Oops.
Now, when you get up there, go ahead and hoist me up. Got it? You on the porch yet? What? That's it? I came all this way just to get stuck at the wrong end of this rock pile? For the love of Pete. Go on into the bushes and do your business.
Okay, here, hold my stuff. I've always wanted to try this. Mr. Fredrickson, am I supposed to dig the hole before or after?
Yeah, none of my concern.
Oh. It's before!
Yeah. La, 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 la.
I found the snipe!
Oh, did you?
Are they tall?
Oh, yes, they're very tall.
Do they have a lot of colors?
They do indeed.
Do they like chocolate?
Oh, yeah. Chocolate. Ah! Ah!
Sometimes when you're developing a relationship, it takes time to ease into each other's styles. Well, when a friend lends a hand, it may not end the way you expect it to. And sometimes a friendship can be a little uncomfortable, as we saw in that very last clip. It takes a while to find the rhythm of friendship and connection. But we are desirous of relationship. Like if we don't have it, we die. If we don't have it, we find ourselves isolated and alone and lacking in connection. So it's important for us to recognize that sometimes friendships come from the most unlikeliest sources. People who you would think you would never have anything in common with, you might find the greatest sense of connection with. It doesn't always work out at the front end. You are going to have disagreements and you are going to have points of disconnection, but the worthier pursuit is to be able to be there for one another, to be able to be there and be connected. Even greater is just being willing to be open to the idea of a friendship with people maybe that are different from you, that look different from you, that maybe were born in a different place than you, speak a different language than you, have a different culture than you. It's an opportunity. It takes vulnerability. It takes a willingness, but it can be so fulfilling. And there's this final clip that shows maybe what the payoff can be like.
Receiving their badges, the following explorers will graduate to senior explorers. For extreme mountaineering lore, congratulations, Jimmy. For wild animal defensive arts, congratulations, Brandon. For assisting the elderly, Russell, is there someone that,
Excuse me. Pardon me. Old man coming through. I'm here for him.
Congratulations, Russell. Sir?
Russell, for assisting the elderly and for performing above and beyond the call of duty, I would like to award you the highest honor I can bestow. The Ellie Badge.
All right, I think that covers everybody. So let's give a big explorer call to our brand new senior wilderness explorers. Ready, everybody?
I imagine most of you are going to go home and watch it this afternoon. The reason why I wanted to show these clips today was to talk about the idea of friendship. In most contexts, we get to control some of the interplay. But when we look at the gospel reading for today, Jesus asked a deeper question. He said to the person, you tell me who the neighbor is once I describe this story. And then he tells the story of the man who was injured and how he was laying on the side of the road and how people from his own community walked by him, were uninterested in being bothered by the situation. Maybe they thought, I don't want to get into any trouble, or I don't want to be inconvenienced. Sometimes being a neighbor is about being inconvenienced. Sometimes being a neighbor is about connecting with someone who is different than you. So we see the Samaritan who has every reason in life to avoid this Jewish individual. He was part of a community that had oppressed the Samaritans, that had traditionally, historically been a group of people to be feared. And yet, in this moment, the only thing that he responded to was this internal drive to be a good neighbor, to be someone who showed compassion, who cared, who showed love, who spent his own earnings in order to make sure this person was taken care of. And as we operate in a climate in our country today where there seems to be a lot of division because of social media and because of differences of opinions, political affiliations, and a lot of people are villainized because of the color of their skin, because of the backgrounds that they come from, because of the history that a person may have with a particular people group. Even now, we're called on a greater level by this story. We are challenged by this story, by the words of Jesus, to show compassion. And how can we do this? How can we be the change agents that say, you know what, I'm going to give up a little of my comfort and security to step in and to be a neighbor, because that's what the world needs right now. Would we agree? Yeah? Amen. I'm going to end with an amazing story from an event that took place in Wichita, Kansas. If you could put that picture up. How many of you guys have heard of Black Lives Matter, right? Everyone's heard of the movement, yeah? And there has been a lot of controversy surrounded by the movement Black Lives Matter. There has been a lot of disconnect. There have been a lot of attitudes that people have had that says, well, hey, I like people of different races, and I don't understand why there needs to be such a big to-do about things. And specifically, there has been a lot of protesting and a lot of activism, specifically dealing with how the police engage with the African American community. Now, I don't have to point out how many stories that we see repeatedly and tragically on the news that deal with what seems to be an inconsistency in relationship between law enforcement and the African American community. When I was a teenager, there were times that I got pulled over and the explanation was nothing more than you looked suspicious. And it was not easy to deal with. I will say, though, I kind of brushed it off. I didn't experience what it's like to sit in a vehicle and get pulled over and wonder if I was going to survive the experience. I just, on the ride in today, was listening to an NPR story about this incident in Starbucks. Have you guys heard about this? Where two African American men were just waiting for a friend, and they were arrested and handcuffed because one of the employees thought that they were suspicious looking. And the police came in, outnumbered the individuals probably 2-1, arrested them, and they were arrested for a whole evening, and there was no charges pressed. So there is a little inconsistency. We can't turn a blind eye to things that we see, but how do we become a good neighbor and institute or accept or connect with change? And that's why I wanted to leave with this story. Members of the Wichita, Kansas Police Department spent Sunday afternoon eating and talking with people from the community at a cookout that was planned by the local Black Lives Matter group. The event was called First Step Community Cookout, a reference to the goal of bridging the gap between police and community that they serve. Taking place instead of a protest that had been planned for that Sunday, the cookout occurred. After which the police chief, Gordon Ramsay, had a lengthy meeting with the leader of the activist group, A.J. Bohannon, and other members of the local Black Lives Movement. And here are some quotes from that particular event. At one table, there were three men, a black man, a Hispanic man, and a white man, and they sat down with hamburgers next to the police. I had never seen anything like this before. Another quote, "It was the first time since 1992 that Jarvis Scott, the black man, had sat down with police officers, and the other two said it was the first time ever sitting down with someone from the African American community." After the event, Ramsey thanks those who came and issued a challenge to other police departments to hold similar type events. It takes two parties to make a healthy relationship. In response to one of the department's many tweets about the barbecue on Twitter, a user wrote, "This makes me happy. For the first time in a long while, that anything in the news has made me happy." Being a neighbor is about first steps. Sometimes someone will come to you, but more often we have the opportunity to come to other people. There is a lot of hurt that's occurred in our country because of a myriad of reasons. How can we today accept the challenge of Jesus to say, who is my neighbor? And what does it mean to be a neighbor? Of course, the people who live next door to you, that's a given. But what about stepping outside of our comfort zones, engaging with community of people who are different than us? Maybe people who might even make us feel uncomfortable. The only way we're going to know if we can be a good neighbor is to step into some spaces where the neighboring is needed. And right now, as a challenge, I think from the gospel, our challenge is to be good neighbors.